This is the Dive Into Discovery podcast, where curiosity meets insight, and every conversation uncovers a new layer of understanding.
All right, everyone, buckle up, because today we're going deep on a topic that's totally shaking up our understanding of history: the first humans in the Americas. I bet you all remember learning about the Bering Land Bridge, right?
Oh, yeah, the classic image of those intrepid Ice Age travelers trekking across that frozen land bridge from Siberia to Alaska.
Right, and then, of course, the Clovis people, those master hunters with their iconic spear points. That was the story for a long time, at least. But the research you've shared, it's like, whoa, hold on.
It's like hitting the rewind button on history, big time.
Exactly. So let's break this down. What kind of evidence is making us rethink this whole narrative?
Well, let's start with archaeology. Turns out there are sites that predate Clovis by thousands of years. Sites that completely blow the old timeline out of the water.
Okay, so give me an example, like what kind of site?
Well, take Monte Verde in Chile. It's like a time capsule from 14,500 years ago. 14,500?
Yeah, that's way before Clovis, right. But what makes this site so special?
It's not just a few scattered artifacts. They found evidence of dwellings, tools made from wood and bone, even preserved plant remains. It paints a picture of a well-established community, not just some temporary camp.
So it's like a glimpse into life in the Americas long before Clovis even entered the scene.
Precisely. And Monte Verde isn't alone. There's Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania. Get this, it dates back to 16,000 years ago.
16,000, wow. That's incredible. So if these pre-Clovis people weren't coming across the Bering Land Bridge, where were they coming from? How are we tracing their origins?
Well, that's where genetics comes in. By analyzing the DNA of modern Native American populations, scientists can trace their ancestry back to migrations from Asia. And guess what? Those migrations happened at least 15,000 years ago, maybe even earlier.
So the genetics are pretty much confirming what the archaeology is suggesting.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful evidence. And it gets even more interesting. The genetic data also points to a genetic bottleneck that occurred during those early migrations.
Okay, bottleneck. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
So imagine a small group of people making that initial journey to the Americas. Maybe just a handful of individuals. Now, those individuals became the ancestors of many, many Native American populations today. That's a bottleneck, a narrowing of genetic diversity.
Wow, I see. So this small founding population really shaped the genetic landscape for generations to come.
That's fascinating. Okay, so we have these pre-Clovis sites that are totally upending the old timeline, and then genetics is backing them up. But what about the Bering Land Bridge theory? Is that completely off the table now?
Well, the more we learn, the more we realize that the Bering Land Bridge might not have been the only route. It's definitely still a possibility, but those new discoveries are leading to some really exciting alternative theories.
Okay, like what? Spill it. What other routes might those early explorers have taken?
Well, one of the most intriguing possibilities is the Pacific coastal route. What if these early migrants traveled by boat down the Pacific coast, taking advantage of the marine resources along the way? A coastal migration, that's a whole different way of looking at it. But wouldn't it be pretty much impossible to find any evidence of that? I mean, with rising sea levels and all, wouldn't most of the traces be gone?
You're absolutely right. Finding evidence for a coastal migration is a huge challenge. But there's some fascinating clues starting to pop up.
Oh, really? Like, I'm all ears. What kind of clues?
Well, let's talk about the Paisley Caves in Oregon. Researchers found something pretty remarkable there. Human DNA preserved in fossilized feces. And they date back around 14,000 years.
Wait, are you talking about ancient poop?
Yep, coprolites, as they're scientifically known.
Okay.
And they can tell us a lot more than you might think. The DNA in those coprolites suggests a human presence in the Pacific Northwest long before Clovis was supposed to be around.
Hold up. So we have these early settlements that are challenging the old timeline, and genetics is backing them up, and now we have fossilized poop supporting a coastal route. Things are getting really interesting here.
They definitely are. And remember that genetic bottleneck we were talking about, that small founding population? Well, some scientists are starting to think that there may have been multiple waves of migration to the Americas.
Multiple waves, so not just one group, but several different migrations over time.
Exactly. Think about it. We see these different tool traditions at sites like Cactus Hill and the Buttermilk Creek Complex. Those could very well be signs of separate groups arriving with their own unique technologies and cultural practices.
Wow. So this isn't just a simple, straightforward story of one migration. This is a complex tapestry of different cultures and movements, all weaving together to create the story of the first Americans.
It's a story that's far more intricate and fascinating than we ever imagined, and we've only just scratched the surface.
All right, we're back and ready to delve even deeper into the mysteries surrounding the first Americans. Last time, we talked about how recent discoveries are completely changing what we thought we knew about their arrival.
Yeah, those new timelines are definitely raising all sorts of new questions about the routes they might have taken. Remember we touched on the Pacific coastal route?
Oh, yeah, the idea that they traveled by boat down the Pacific coast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But did they really hug that coastline all the way from Asia to South America? That's a long journey.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Could they really navigate that entire distance by boat? Especially during the last ice age. I can only imagine the challenges they must have faced.
Well, you're right to question it. Just imagine those vast ice sheets covering so much of North America. Traveling inland would have been so incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. It makes you appreciate just how resilient and resourceful these early explorers had to be. To even attempt something like that, wow, that takes guts.
Oh, absolutely. And when you think about it, the coastal route would have offered a pretty consistent source of food, right? Fish, shellfish, marine mammals.
Yeah, it's like a giant seafood buffet stretching down the whole coast.
Okay, I'm starting to see why that route might have been appealing. But hold on. If they were traveling by boat, wouldn't those boats have just decayed a long time ago? We're talking thousands of years.
That is a really good point. You've hit on one of the biggest challenges with proving this theory. Finding actual boats from that time period is extremely rare, but it doesn't mean they weren't using them, right?
Right, okay. So what kind of boats could they have used? I'm picturing something pretty basic.
Well, there are researchers who study ancient boat building, and they believe that early humans were much more skilled than we give them credit for. They've even tried recreating some of these ancient boats, just using the materials and methods that they would have had back then.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Like those reed boats they use on Lake Titicaca. Right.
Exactly. Or even simpler rafts or canoes made from logs or animal skins. Things that might not leave behind lasting archaeological traces, but would have been good enough for coastal travel. Wow, I can just picture it now. These voyagers setting off on this incredible journey into completely uncharted territory, relying on their own ingenuity and courage to explore a new world. It's a real adventure.
Oh, it definitely is. And think about the navigational skills they must have had. No GPS, no compass. They had to rely on the stars, the currents, their knowledge of the coastline. Talk about being in tune with your surroundings.
Yeah, totally. It really does make you realize how connected they must have been to nature. I mean, they had to be in order to survive and thrive in that kind of environment.
Absolutely. And you can actually see that connection in the tools and artifacts that archaeologists are finding. Remember we talked about Cactus Hill and the Buttermilk Creek complex? Well, the tools at those sites tell us that they weren't just focused on hunting big game. They were also fishing, they were gathering plants.
So they were adapting to the resources in their specific location.
Exactly. It wasn't just one migration, one culture. This was a diverse group of people who were really good at adapting.
Yeah, much more diverse and adaptable than we originally thought. Okay, but if the Pacific Coast Route was a major pathway for these migrations, wouldn't we expect to find more archaeological sites along the coast?
Logically, yes. But remember rising sea levels.
Oh, right.
That's a major obstacle here. Those rising waters have submerged huge areas of what used to be coastline areas that would have been ideal spots for early settlements.
So a lot of the evidence is literally underwater.
Unfortunately, yes. It's like trying to solve a mystery, but half the clues are missing. But archaeologists are a creative bunch. They're coming up with all sorts of ways to try and find those underwater sites.
Oh, wow. Like, how are they doing that? Are they diving down with shovels and scuba gear?
Well, it's a combination of high-tech and traditional methods. They use sonar, advanced diving techniques, even computer modeling.
So they're mapping out potential locations.
Exactly. It's like opening up a whole new frontier for archaeology. It really makes you wonder what kind of incredible secrets might be hidden beneath the waves, just waiting to be discovered. Oh, I'm sure there are more surprises in store. Who knows what we'll find in the years to come as technology keeps advancing.
Yeah, who knows? My mind is officially blown. It's like we're rewriting history in real time.
And that's part of what makes archaeology and genetics so exciting. They're constantly challenging our assumptions and forcing us to rethink what we thought we knew. It's a never-ending journey of discovery.
It really is. You know, this whole discussion about ancient migrations is making me think about my own family history. I wonder if any of my ancestors were among those first Americans.
That's a great question. And actually, more and more people are starting to ask that same question, especially with how popular genetic testing has become.
Yeah, it's like having a personal time machine, right? Imagine tracing your lineage back through generations and uncovering those hidden connections to the past.
And it's not just about individual family trees either. Studying ancient DNA is helping us understand the relationships between different populations. It's like we're putting together this giant puzzle of human history.
I love that analogy. It's like every person's DNA is a little piece of that puzzle, and the more pieces we find, the more complete the picture becomes. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the origins and the movements of these early Americans, but what about their lives once they got here? How did they adapt to these new environments? What kind of societies did they build?
That's where archaeology really shines. By digging up and studying the remains of their settlements, we can start to get a glimpse into their daily lives, how they organize themselves, even their beliefs.
So what are those archaeological sites telling us? Were they living in small nomadic groups, or did they establish larger, more permanent communities?
Well, it really depended on the region and the resources that were available. Some groups, especially on the Great Plains, were highly mobile. They would follow the movements of the bison herds. While others, like those in the Pacific Northwest, they built villages that were more permanent. They relied more on those abundant salmon runs.
So different lifestyles based on the environment. Pretty amazing how resourceful they were.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that resourcefulness resulted in this amazing diversity of cultures across the Americas.
It really is inspiring to think about their ingenuity and resilience. They were arriving in a totally new world, and they didn't just survive, they thrived.
And their legacy is still here today in the languages, traditions, and the genetic makeup of Native American populations.
It really is a powerful connection to the past. But, you know, we've been talking a lot about archaeology and genetics. There's actually another source of information that we haven't mentioned yet, oral history. Oral history. You mean those stories, songs, and traditions that have been passed down for generations?
Exactly. And those stories often contain a wealth of knowledge about their ancestors, their migrations, their cultural practices, and their relationship to the land.
Yeah, that's true. It's like a direct link to the past. But are those stories always reliable?
Well, it's important to approach them with respect and an understanding of the cultural context. But oral histories are often rooted in real events, and they can offer these unique perspectives that you can't find anywhere else. Perspectives that really complement the archaeological and genetic evidence.
So by bringing those sources together, archaeology, genetics, and oral history, we get a much richer understanding of the first Americans.
It's the power of taking an interdisciplinary approach. Bringing together different ways of knowing and studying the past helps us get closer to the truth. It really is like piecing together this massive puzzle, with each piece adding to the big picture.
And I bet there are a lot of missing pieces still. So what mysteries are archaeologists and geneticists still working on?
Oh, so many. For one, we still don't know for sure exactly when and where the very first humans set foot in the Americas. Was it 20,000 years ago? 30,000? Maybe even earlier? The search for a definitive answer continues.
And what about those multiple migrations? We're still trying to figure out how many there were, where they came from, and how they interacted with each other.
Definitely. Those are all big questions that researchers are still actively investigating. And with every new discovery, every genetic analysis, we get a little bit closer to solving the puzzle.
It's like this giant detective story, constantly unfolding. And with each new piece of the puzzle, the story becomes more incredible.
I agree. And it's not just about filling in the gaps. It's about acknowledging the incredible resilience and diversity of the first Americans and their descendants.
It's about understanding their journeys, their challenges, their triumphs, and the incredible legacy they left behind, a legacy that continues to shape the Americas to this day.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground here, from alternate migration routes to the power of oral history. We've really expanded our understanding of the first Americans, but I feel like there's still more to uncover.
Oh, without a doubt. We've just skimmed the surface. There's so much more out there to explore. Well, I can't wait to see what other secrets and surprises we find in our final part of this deep dive. This journey has been absolutely mind-blowing. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the first Americans. And I'm ready to tackle some of the biggest questions that are still out there. Like, what happened to all those megafaunas? You know, the mammoths, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, they all disappeared around the same time humans arrived.
It's one of the most intriguing mysteries, for sure. I mean, just imagine those creatures roaming the landscape alongside those first Americans. It's like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
But their extinction lines up with human arrival. That can't be just a coincidence.
Yeah, I remember learning in school that humans were the main culprits. Like, they overhunted those giant animals until they vanished. But is that really the whole story?
Well, it's definitely more complicated than that. Overhunting may have been a factor in some cases, but there's a lot of evidence that climate change played a huge role. Think about those dramatic shifts in temperature, the rising sea levels. All of those things were happening right as humans were arriving.
It must have been a tough time for those megafauna, even without humans showing up.
Exactly. Those environmental changes would have put a lot of pressure on those animals, making them more vulnerable.
So you have these giant creatures already struggling to adapt, and then bam, humans show up. It's like throwing a wrench in the whole ecosystem.
Right. And we have to remember that those early Americans weren't just passively living in this environment, they were actively shaping it. I mean, think about their hunting, their use of fire, their gathering practices.
Yeah, we talked about how they adapted their lifestyles to different environments, whether they were following bison herds on the Great Plains or living off those salmon runs in the Pacific Northwest. They were definitely having an impact.
Absolutely. And that impact continues to this day. The introduction of agriculture, clearing forests, domesticating plants and animals, all of these things have had a huge impact on the Americas.
It makes you realize that we're not just inheriting this land, we're responsible for it.
For sure. And understanding the past can give us insights into how to manage that responsibility in a better way. Speaking of the past, let's talk about the genetic legacy of those first Americans. What connections can we make between those ancient populations and the diversity of Native American communities today?
That's what I find so fascinating. It's like genetics is the key to unlocking all these secrets about our connections to the past.
Exactly. And those ancient DNA samples are providing those crucial links. It's amazing how the genetic data often confirms what's been passed down through oral histories.
Yeah, we were just talking about those oral histories, those stories and traditions. Are there any specific examples where those stories are backed up by the genetics?
Oh, definitely. There are many cases where tribes have these stories about their ancestors, their migrations, and their origins. And then the DNA evidence comes along and backs them up. It's like scientific validation for beliefs that have been passed down for generations.
That's pretty cool. It's like the past is speaking to us, confirming those ancient stories.
It really emphasizes the importance of respecting those indigenous knowledge systems. They're an essential part of understanding the full picture. But even with all the progress we've made, there's still so much we don't know. There are all these mysteries that researchers are still trying to unravel.
Oh, I love a good mystery. So what are some of those big questions?
Well, the exact timing and location of that very first arrival is still up for debate. Was it 20,000 years ago, 30,000, even earlier? We're still looking for those definitive answers.
And what about those multiple migrations? I'm really curious about how many waves there were, where those different groups originated, how they interacted with each other.
Those are some of the big questions that researchers are focusing on. And with each new discovery, each genetic analysis, we get a little closer to piecing it all together.
It really is like a giant puzzle, isn't it? Slowly but surely putting all the pieces together. And the more we learn, the more amazing the picture becomes.
It really is incredible. And it's not just about filling in the gaps. It's about recognizing and celebrating the diversity and the resilience of those first Americans and their descendants.
It's about understanding their epic journeys, their struggles, their triumphs. It's about recognizing that their legacy continues to shape the Americas to this day.
Well, I think it's safe to say that we've officially reached the end of our deep dive into the first Americans. We've traveled back in time, explored some groundbreaking discoveries, and grappled with some of the biggest questions in human history.
It's been a truly fascinating journey. And I hope we've sparked a little curiosity in our listeners, encouraged them to learn more about this incredible chapter in human history.
I know, I'm definitely hooked. And remember, everyone, this is just the beginning. With every new discovery, the story of the first Americans just keeps getting more exciting. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never stop learning. Who knows what incredible secrets are still out there just waiting to be uncovered.
What did you think of this week's episode? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to join us next time as we dive even deeper. And as always, stay curious, because you never know what discoveries are just around the corner.